Welcome the anointed ones. The most terrifying thing about truth is that it doesn't knock. It kicks the door down. Chosen ones, let's be real, people ain't never seen anything like you before. You walk into rooms and unintentionally hand out ego deaths like Oprah used to give away cars. You get a breakdown, everybody gets a breakdown. Except unlike Oprah's gifts, nobody's really excited to receive yours. Here's a fact for you. Studies in psychology show that the ego treats truth like a physical threat. The brain literally reacts as if it's under attack when its illusions are challenged. Now imagine walking around as a spiritual OG who is that truth in human form. You don't even have to say a word. Your aura does the heavy lifting, and suddenly folks who thought they were untouchable start questioning everything about themselves. This is why people stare, avoid eye contact, or get overly defensive in your presence. It's not you. It's their ego suffocating. They've built whole identities out of masks, and you've got the kind of spirit that rips those masks off without permission. It's like being a living demolition crew in a world full of cardboard castles. And here's the kicker. They think they're mad at you, but what they're really mad at is the reflection you force them to see. You don't fight their ego, you expose it. You don't attack their pride, you deflate it. And you do it all while staying unbothered, sipping your water and minding your business. So today, we're diving into exactly why you, as a chosen one, a spiritual OG, leave people stumbling through ego deaths they didn't sign up for. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why they can't look at you the same ever again. Number 1. Your presence triggers identity collapses. Your presence triggers identity collapses because you don't walk around carrying illusions. Most people are stitched together by the roles they play, the money they make, or the crowd they impress. That's the scaffolding that holds their ego upright. The problem is when they come across someone like you, all that scaffolding starts to shake. You don't even have to say a word. Your energy itself is a challenge. It's not loud, it's not boastful, but it carries a weight that makes others painfully aware of the masks they're wearing. Think about how often people rely on titles or appearances to define who they are. They introduce themselves with their job, their degree, their relationship status, or their possessions. These aren't their true selves, they're costumes the ego has picked out. And it works for them until they meet a chosen one. Suddenly they feel naked, exposed, because your authenticity makes their carefully crafted image look like cheap plastic. You don't try to strip them down, but your presence leaves them no choice but to notice the difference. This is why some people become defensive or even hostile around you. It's not that you did something to offend them. It's that you've quietly revealed that their sense of identity is fragile. When someone has spent years building a life around performance, recognition, or control, being in the presence of someone who is grounded in truth feels like a personal threat. Their ego doesn't know how to process it, so it reacts with jealousy, anger, or avoidance. They'd rather protect the illusion than admit they've been hiding behind it all along. The irony is, your presence gives them a chance to confront themselves and grow. But most people don't see it that way. To them, the collapse of their false identity feels like death. And in a way, it is. The death of lies they've mistaken for reality. What makes you exceptional is that you didn't just survive your own ego deaths, you embraced them. You let your illusions fall apart so you could rebuild on truth. That's why you carry the weight you do now. Others feel it, but instead of seeing it as an invitation to evolve, many panic because they know deep down that if they were to walk your path, their whole self would have to die first. Number 2. You're a mirror that doesn't lie. You're a mirror that doesn't lie, and that alone is enough to shake people to their core. Most people are used to reflections they can manipulate. Social media filters, polite compliments, carefully crafted images. They've become masters at curating what others see, so they believe they're in control of how they're perceived. But when they encounter you, that control slips. You reflect them as they truly are, not as they wish to be seen. And the rawness of that reflection is unbearable for those who have built their lives on illusion. What unsettles them most is that you don't do it intentionally. You're not out here trying to expose anyone, but truth naturally radiates from you. The light you carry makes shadows stand out, and people sense immediately when they're hiding behind one. That's why they get uncomfortable around you. It's not your words, your tone, or even your actions. It's the fact that they can't pretend with you the way they do with everyone else. Their rehearsed identities suddenly fall apart, and all that's left is what they were hoping no one would ever notice. This is why you often see such extremes in how people react to you. Some are drawn to you with respect, gratitude, or even admiration because deep down, they're hungry for honesty. They find relief in finally standing in front of someone who sees through the nonsense and accepts the real them. Others, however, recoil. They get defensive, passive-aggressive, or even hostile. Not because you've done them wrong, but because their ego cannot survive the kind of clarity you represent. To their ego, you're dangerous. You cut through the act, and that exposure feels like an attack. The power of your mirror is that it strips away what's fake without you needing to force anything. People are left with themselves, and that's the one confrontation most of them spend their entire lives avoiding. They don't want to deal with the insecurity, the pride, or the fear that lies underneath their masks. But standing in front of you makes avoidance impossible. You are proof that living without masks is not only possible, but powerful. That revelation is liberating for some and terrifying for others. But either way, your presence leaves no one the same. Number 3. You destroy false hierarchies without lifting a finger. You destroy false hierarchies without lifting a finger because you're not bound by the systems that people cling to for validation. The world has taught most individuals to measure worth by status, money, appearance, titles, influence, or the size of their following. These are the ladders egos climb to feel important, and for a while, it works. They get to stand taller than others, not because they're truly elevated, but because they've built their height on temporary platforms. When you walk in, however, all those platforms suddenly feel unstable. Your presence exposes how fragile those ladders really are. You don't need wealth to command respect. You don't need a stage to carry influence, and you don't need validation to prove value. That's why people with inflated egos struggle in your presence. They realize that the power they've been flaunting is conditional, but yours is internal and permanent. Their titles, degrees, or positions lose weight when compared to your authenticity. It isn't something you force or even speak about. It's simply obvious. They've invested their entire identity into proving they're somebody, while you stand firm in being who you are, with nothing to prove. This silent dismantling of false hierarchies is what causes people to secretly resent you. They can't figure out why others respect you, listen to you, or feel drawn to you without the usual credentials or performance. Their ego screams, "This isn't fair," because they've played by the world's rules and still can't match the authority you carry naturally. It leaves them exposed, because the truth is that their sense of superiority was never real. It was propped up by external validation. What sets you apart is that you didn't climb their ladder. You built a different foundation entirely. While others were chasing applause, you were chasing alignment. While they were obsessed with image, you were refining character. That's why their hierarchy collapses when you show up. It was never solid to begin with. The deeper truth is, your presence reminds them that status can vanish overnight, but a soul rooted in truth will always remain unshaken. That realization burns their ego, because it means they've invested in a system that can't survive in the presence of someone who doesn't need it. Number 4. You don't compete, you outgrow. You don't compete, you outgrow, and that alone unsettles people more than anything else you could do. Competition is the ego's lifeline. It survives by constantly measuring, comparing, and proving itself against others. For most people, life is a scoreboard. Who's richer, who's more attractive, who's more successful, who gets the most attention. That's the framework they operate in, and they assume everyone else is playing the same game. But then, They meet you, and the rules no longer apply. You're not chasing a trophy. You're not running their race. You're walking a completely different path. That's why they can't make sense of you. Your growth isn't motivated by proving someone wrong or showing that you're ahead. It comes from an entirely different place. You evolve because truth demands it, because your soul requires it. That kind of expansion isn't something anyone can compete with, because it's not about beating others, it's about becoming more of yourself. And when people realize they can't box you into their competition-based world, panic sets in. If their only language is comparison, then you've stepped outside their dictionary altogether. How can they measure someone who refuses to be measured? How do they fight someone who's not even on the battlefield? This is why people sometimes project jealousy or hostility toward you without a clear reason. On the surface, you haven't done anything to them. But beneath it, your existence shatters their belief that life is about outshining others. You show them that their victories mean nothing if they're rooted in insecurity, and that reality feels like a threat. They're addicted to competition, and your presence proves the addiction was unnecessary all along. The truth is, you've realized something they haven't. Competition is a trap. If you're always trying to win, you're still tied to the same system that defines who's above and who's below. Outgrowing it frees you from that cycle, and that freedom is what others mistake for superiority. It isn't superiority, it's liberation. And nothing makes the ego panic more than realizing there's a way of living that doesn't revolve around proving, comparing, or outdoing. You've shown that the real victory isn't in competing. It's in evolving beyond the need to. Number 5. You normalize what they call impossible. Your life proves the impossible is negotiable, and that truth undermines other people's excuses faster than any argument ever could. When rules get bent for you, when limits dissolve around your persistence, and when cages open because you chose not to accept them, everyone who built their identity on can't feels exposed. They realize their boundaries were stories they told themselves, not facts written in stone. Your existence becomes a quiet indictment of complacency, not loud or preachy, just undeniable. People rely on neat explanations to sleep at night. Limits keep them safe from the work and risk that real change requires. When you walk through those barriers and keep moving, it unsettles them because the narrative they relied on, that's just how things are, crumbles. Your wins are inconvenient evidence. They show that success, healing, freedom, or transformation were possible all along, but most people chose comfort over the messy labor of becoming. That realization hits like cold water. It's not that you're different in ways they can't access, it's that you were willing to do what they wouldn't. This is why they either minimize what you did or attack the messenger. Minimization protects their self-image. If your breakthrough was luck, timing, or unfair advantage, then their inaction still looks reasonable. Attack deflects responsibility, but both responses betray awareness that your life disproves their safe stories. The ego prefers blame because blame keeps the illusion intact. Your normalizing the impossible forces the ego into a defensive crouch. Your example also widens the map for those ready to change. For some, seeing you work through what they feared makes expansion feel possible instead of mythical. For others, it becomes a mirror showing how small they allowed themselves to remain. The impact is relentless. Doors that once seemed locked show seams. Rules that seemed absolute reveal exceptions. Explanations once used as shields become thin and transparent. What truly terrifies egos is that your results didn't come from grand gestures or constant justification. They came from steady, relentless alignment with what matters, and an unwillingness to accept that's how it's always been as a final answer. Your life rewrites the rule book by living differently, and that rewrite forces others to reckon with their own quiet compromises. That reckoning is what many call unfair. In reality, it's the clearest form of truth. The impossible was never a wall, only a choice to stay on one side. Number 6. You pull the mask off. Spiritual pretenders, You pull the mask off spiritual pretenders because your very presence is a test of authenticity. There are plenty of people who talk the talk, dress the part, and perform spirituality like it's a brand. They know the right words, they light the incense, they strike the poses, and on the surface it looks convincing. But what they can't fake is depth. And when they meet someone who actually carries the weight of real alignment, their facade starts to collapse under its own emptiness. The difference between you and them is that you didn't study spirituality to appear wise. You lived through fires that forced wisdom into your bones. You didn't memorize affirmations, you wrestled with your own shadows. That kind of lived experience radiates differently, and anyone standing in front of you either rises to that vibration or is exposed for not having it. Pretenders can mimic mannerisms, but they can't manufacture presence. And presence is what speaks the loudest when they're confronted with you. This is why spiritual pretenders often either idolize you or resent you. Idolization happens because they secretly know you carry what they only talk about, so they latch on in hopes of borrowing some of it. Resentment happens because your existence reminds them they've been hiding behind image instead of substance. In both cases, you force them into clarity. They can no longer pretend the mask they wear is the real thing. Your light demands they either grow or admit they're faking it. The ego hates this exposure, which is why pretenders often scramble when you come around. They'll talk louder, act more righteous, or try to prove themselves through surface-level displays of depth. But none of that holds. The spirit you carry doesn't recognize performance. It only resonates with truth. And when truth is present, performance looks cheap and hollow. What makes your gift both unsettling and undeniable is that you don't set out to expose anyone. You simply live aligned, and in doing so, you reveal who isn't. It's not about judgment, it's about resonance. Those who truly walk with spirit feel seen and strengthened in your presence. Those who only wear spirituality as an outfit feel stripped. That's why your path doesn't just inspire, it unmasks. And once someone's been unmasked, they can never look at themselves, or at you, the same way again. Number 7. You don't feed insecurities, you starve them. You don't feed insecurities, you starve them. And that refusal changes the whole dynamic in any room. Most people survive by feeding one another's hungers for approval. They pass compliments like currency, prop up fragile reputations, and nod along so everyone keeps feeling safe inside their little constructed worlds. You don't keep that currency in circulation. You see through the shaky scaffolding people build out of praise, and you refuse to invest in it. That refusal looks like coldness to those who rely on external validation, but it is actually the clearest kindness. You stop enabling a lie that keeps them stuck. When someone depends on being constantly lifted, a neutral response from you cuts deeper than any criticism. You won't inflate someone to make yourself comfortable. You won't applaud mediocrity just to keep the peace. Instead, you respond from alignment and truth, which often means silence or honesty where people expect flattery. This creates discomfort because the habit of leaning on others for self-worth suddenly has no support. People panic because their usual scaffolding has been removed, and they discover they were never standing on solid ground to begin with. Starving insecurities doesn't mean brutal honesty delivered as punishment. It means refusing to be complicit in the maintenance of illusions. It means not laughing at jokes meant to mask pain, not complimenting achievements that were only meant to impress, and not pretending everything is fine when it's not. Over time, that steady lack of reinforcement forces a different kind of growth. Without constant external props, a person either learns to feed themselves from a deeper source, or they keep withering under the weight of their own dependence. Either way, the result is clearer. Your discipline is a mirror that points back to responsibility. People who have lived on validation their whole lives have to learn how to sit with raw feelings, to do the inner work they've been avoiding. That process is painful and resisted, but it is also liberating. Starvation exposes the rot and gives room for real nutrition, self-honesty, self-respect, and genuine competence. You don't enjoy watching someone struggle. You're simply unwilling to trade short-term comfort for long-term growth. Because of that, some will resent you, accuse you of cruelty, or slander you to recruit others into defending them. That's predictable. The deeper truth is that you offer a harsher, truer mercy. You stop feeding the lie, so what's left must either die or be made whole. In the end, starvation becomes a doorway. Those willing to walk through rebuild themselves on sturdier ground, and they never again mistake applause for worth. Number 8. You redefine power without domination. You redefine power without domination because your authority doesn't need to scream to be heard. Where most people equate strength with volume, control, or intimidation, you've learned that true power is steadier and more surgical. It influences by presence, clarity, and unshakable alignment rather than by coercion. That form of power makes others uncomfortable because it removes the usual levers they depend on, fear, manipulation, status, and replaces them with something they can't easily mimic. When a person tries to dominate, they force compliance. When you lead from quiet authority, people move because something inside them recognizes the truth of your direction, not because they're afraid of you. This distinction kills the ego's favorite myth, that dominance equals strength. You don't need to control outcomes or people to be effective. Your decisions come from a place deeper than image management or short-term advantage, so they carry weight without any accompanying drama. That steadiness is disorienting to those who make noise to hide insecurity. They expect power to look a certain way, harsh, flashy, demanding. And when they meet someone who commands respect by simply being consistent and clear, they can't categorize it. The result is the kind of unease that leads them to either mimic and fail, or to push back and reveal their own fragility. This mode of power also rewrites influence. Instead of collecting followers through coercion or spectacle, you draw people who want to grow rather than be controlled. Your interactions are invitations to rise, not traps to be manipulated. That removes the drama of control and replaces it with responsibility and mutual accountability. People who equate domination with power lose their grip because their tactics no longer produce the same outcomes. The people they once moved through fear now slip away or stand firm, refusing to play. Their tactics become ineffective against someone who refuses the broadcasted hierarchy and instead models integrity. Because your power operates off a different blueprint, it exposes the desperation behind many authoritarian displays. Those displays are often theater, overcompensation for insecurity. Your quiet authority strips away the props and leaves only competence and character. That exposure can look like victory for you, but it's more like clarity. The world sees who is building strength and who is staging it. In the end, redefining power without domination doesn't just unsettle egos. It liberates people from false leaders and shows a higher way to lead, one that breeds loyalty through respect, not fear. Number 9. You show that wisdom isn't earned through performance. You show that wisdom isn't earned through performance because everything about you disrupts the world's idea of what it means to know. The ego equates wisdom with effortful display, degrees, awards, speeches, book deals, or standing on platforms that make people look larger than life. For them, wisdom is a performance to be proven, a credential to be displayed. But when you speak, you dismantle that equation in real time. You don't come rehearsed, you don't lean on theatrics, and you don't wear the cloak of superiority. Yet your words cut sharper, travel deeper, and linger longer than anything produced by rehearsed performance. That's what throws people off. You bypass the costume and go straight to the marrow. The difference is that your wisdom doesn't come from accumulating information for applause. It comes from being broken open by life itself and listening when spirit spoke through the cracks. You've been forged in silence, pain, perseverance, and alignment. Those experiences created a depth that no stage could replicate, no credential could validate, and no applause could equal. When you open your mouth, people hear not just knowledge but truth. Truth carries a resonance that no amount of performance can imitate. That resonance exposes the emptiness of those who built their image around looking wise rather than becoming wise. What unsettles egos most is that your wisdom cannot be earned in the way they hoped. They've been running laps in the performance arena, stacking achievements, hoarding recognition, believing that would one day crown them as wise. But when they encounter you, they see that wisdom is not staged, it is embodied. You live it, and because you live it, your words carry an authority they can't counterfeit. The realization dethrones their entire belief system. Because if wisdom flows from source directly, then applause, status, and credentials are irrelevant. This is why some people try to discredit you. They'll question your background, dismiss your lack of qualifications, or scoff at the simplicity of your delivery. That's the ego scrambling to protect its illusion that performance equals depth. But no matter how they resist, your presence proves otherwise. The power of your wisdom is that it doesn't need validation to exist. It speaks for itself. And once people have heard it, they can't unhear it. That's the ultimate disruption. You remind them that truth is not a show, it's a state of being. Number 10. You've mastered detachment without losing compassion. You've mastered detachment without losing compassion, and that paradox alone shakes people in ways they can't explain. Most believe love and attachment are the same thing. They think caring means clinging, that compassion must always come with ownership, and that connection cannot exist without control. But you live differently. You've learned how to let go of what doesn't serve you, people, possessions, positions, without hardening your heart. You can release without bitterness and still wish well without holding on. That level of freedom confuses egos because for them, letting go always feels like rejection or indifference. For you, it feels like truth. The ego survives by attaching itself to something external. Titles that prove importance, relationships that validate worth, or opinions that define identity. Without those attachments, it feels like it doesn't exist. But you've gone through the kind of stripping that forced you to find selfhood beyond attachments. You lost what most people fear losing, yet you discovered that love doesn't live in possession. It lives in presence. This is why you radiate compassion while holding nothing hostage. Your ability to love without needing to own, control, or demand reveals just how flimsy the ego's version of love actually is. When people experience this from you, it unsettles them. They can't understand how you can genuinely care and yet still walk away. They misinterpret your freedom as coldness, not realizing it's the highest form of respect for yourself and for them. You're not interested in binding people to you out of fear or dependency. You'd rather release them to their own path while still holding space for their humanity. That approach destroys egos because it leaves them with no power to manipulate you. They can't trap you with guilt, possession, or obligation because your compassion doesn't require chains. What makes your detachment even more disruptive is that it exposes how little control anyone actually has. The ego craves permanence, but you live with open hands, understanding that everything is temporary and sacred in its impermanence. You've mastered the balance of loving deeply while letting freely. And that balance is a kind of wisdom most people avoid. To egos, it feels impossible. To souls, it feels like liberation. Your life proves that love isn't proven by clinging tighter, it's proven by remaining kind even when you've let go. That's a language the ego doesn't understand, and it's why your presence dismantles it. Number 11. You turn their weapons into their weaknesses. You turn their weapons into their weaknesses because nothing aimed at you lands the way they expect it to. When people use shame, slander, or attempts to outshine you, they assume those tactics will break your confidence or silence your presence. But instead of destroying you, their attacks act like spotlights that expose more about them than they ever intended. Every insult, every smear, every plot they throw your way bounces back as evidence of your endurance and their fragility. What was meant to bury you ends up becoming proof of your resilience. Shame doesn't stick to you because you've already faced your own shadows and survived them. They can't embarrass you with truths you've already accepted or lies you've already outgrown. In fact, their attempts to drag your name through the mud only highlight how unshakable your foundation is. The more they try to stain you, the clearer your authenticity becomes, and the more obvious it is that they're scrambling to hide their own cracks. That reversal makes their weapon backfire. It doesn't tarnish you, it exposes them. The same happens when they try to outshine you. Egos think visibility equals superiority, so they put on displays to prove they're brighter, louder, or more celebrated. But while they're busy performing, you remain steady. People eventually notice that your quiet presence carries more weight than their noisy performance. Their spotlight burns out quickly, while your light doesn't need an audience to keep glowing. That contrast turns their need for attention into a weakness, while your self-assuredness grows even stronger. And when it comes to slander, their words never have the power they expect. Lies may travel fast, but truth travels deeper. Over time, every false story they spin ends up unraveling because your actions contradict it too consistently. Instead of believing the slander, people begin to ask, why are they so obsessed? That question flips the narrative and exposes the insecurity driving their smear campaign. What they thought was a weapon becomes evidence of their own obsession and envy. Your resilience is what transforms their strategies into liabilities. By refusing to crumble, you force the world to measure the attacker, not the target. Their weapons reveal their dependence on destruction, while your survival reveals your dependence on truth. And in the end, that contrast makes their ego collapse under the very weight of the tactics they once thought would elevate them. Number 12. You've died before without leaving Earth. You've already died and come back in ways most people never will. And that experience changes everything about how you move through the world. An ego death isn't a dramatic one-off. It's the quiet undoing of the stories that once defined you, the roles, the defenses, the desperate small-talk masks. You learned the hard way that the identity everyone bets on can be stripped away overnight, and you survived the emptiness on the other side. That survival rewired you. It taught you that your value doesn't depend on approval, that your truth outlives rumor, and that temporary losses don't equal ultimate defeat. Because you've been through those real endings, cheap attacks don't land the way they do on people who never faced collapse. When someone tries to intimidate, manipulate, or belittle you, they're throwing darts at a target that no longer bleeds. Your calm isn't arrogance. It's evidence of having stared through the abyss and come back with clearer sight. That steadiness makes others uncomfortable because they can't rattle you into playing their small games. They realize too late that the pressure tactics that break most people only confirm how deep your endurance runs. This kind of endurance doesn't mean you're numb. It means your heart was broken open and learned how to hold itself steady. You feel deeply, you care fiercely, but you're not dependent on external validation to stay whole. That's a dangerous lesson for ego-driven personalities because it removes their leverage. Guilt, shame, praise, none of it becomes a reliable control mechanism anymore. Your history of surviving inner deaths turned you into someone who can face loss and still return to purpose. That makes resentment and power plays look small, petty, and obvious. People around you sense that you've been remade. Some are humbled and drawn to learn how to rebuild themselves. Others panic because your resurrection is a mirror that shows them what they avoided, the slow, brutal work of honest transformation. Either way, once someone understands you've already walked through death and come back together, their attempts to overpower you collapse under the weight of your story. Your resilience reveals their desperation. Your presence proves that what really matters survives rumor, attack, and failure. That realization breaks egos because it exposes the cheapness of their methods and the depth of your endurance. Number 13, you collapse the illusion of ownership. You collapse the illusion of ownership because you refuse to treat life like a set of possessions to be guarded. Most people live as if identity and safety are built from what they can label mine, a partner who completes them, a job that defines them, an image that protects them. Those attachments become a house of cards. When you move through the world without clinging, you show that nothing is truly owned, not even the story someone tells about themselves. That truth is disorienting because it strips the ego of its favorite tool, control. Ownership feels secure because it promises continuity. People latch onto roles and titles to prove they won't vanish. You don't play that game. You let relationships breathe. You treat positions as responsibilities rather than trophies, and you refuse to let an identity become armor. That non-possessive stance exposes how brittle the usual anchors are. When others realize their sense of self depended on things outside them, the rug goes away, and their panic is mistaken for anger at you. They want to blame a person, a promotion, or a public image, but the deeper shock is facing the fact that permanence was an illusion they paid dearly to maintain. Your freedom forces people into a harder, truer question. Who am I when everything I thought was mine shifts or leaves? Most never ask it because answering requires work, reflection, admitting fear, and dismantling comforting narratives. You make that question unavoidable by living proof that identity can survive loss. Watching you release what everyone else clutches looks reckless to them, but it's actually courageous. You model a different calculus. Hold lightly, act with integrity, and let consequence refine you rather than define you. That perspective removes their leverage. Guilt, jealousy, and control lose their teeth when the person they're aimed at isn't attached in the expected ways. That collapse of ownership also rewrites how people relate to power. If nothing truly belongs to anyone, power becomes stewardship instead of possession. Your life demonstrates stewardship, using influence to serve, not to hoard. That flips arrogant systems on their head and leaves those who built identity on accumulation exposed as small and fearful. They react by trying to reassert ownership through louder claims, but louder claims are rarely truer claims. In the end, collapsing the illusion of ownership is a mercy disguised as disruption. It frees people from the exhausting act of guarding a false self. It invites them to cultivate a steadier center that can weather change. For those unwilling to accept that invitation, your existence becomes a mirror of everything they avoided: impermanence, responsibility, and the humility required to live without possession. That mirror is painful, and pain often reads as threat. But the truth you carry is liberating. Ownership never granted permanence, only a false sense of control, and once that myth falls, the real work of becoming begins. Number 14. You show that true legacy is soul, not image. You show that true legacy is soul, not image, because you don't waste your energy chasing monuments that will eventually crack or applause that fades as soon as the crowd moves on. The ego lives to be remembered, quoted, and idolized, but what it builds rarely survives beyond the surface. You've tapped into something deeper, impact that imprints itself directly onto people's consciousness. That kind of legacy doesn't depend on likes, headlines, or statues. It depends on transformation. Once someone crosses your path, they're not the same afterward, even if they never mention your name again. That's the kind of permanence the ego can't buy. The ego tries to immortalize itself with surface-level achievements. It says, if I get enough recognition, I'll live forever. But you've proven that recognition is fragile currency. Fame vanishes as quickly as it arrives. Praise is conditional and often forgotten. The monuments people build for themselves eventually become ruins. But what you plant in the unseen, the courage you awaken in someone, the healing you spark, the truths you whisper into the collective mind, those things ripple long after you're gone. That's legacy on a soul level, and it terrifies egos because it can't be measured, bought, or stolen. What makes this even more unsettling for others is that you don't even chase legacy. You simply live aligned with truth, and that alignment carries farther than any image management campaign ever could. People sense that your essence is larger than your reputation. They feel your spirit before they remember your name. They carry your words, your example, your presence into their own lives. passing it along in ways that can't be traced back to you directly, yet undeniably came from you. That is power, quiet, invisible, and eternal. When egos realize this, it shatters them. Because if legacy isn't about image, then all their performances, competitions, and status-obsessed pursuits dissolve into nothing. They work to be admired, but admiration dies with memory. You work to embody truth, and truth survives memory. Long after their names fade from plaques and timelines, your essence will still be alive in the choices, awakenings, and freedoms of people you may never even meet. That is the ultimate ego death, the realization that image dies quickly, but soul is indestructible. And you've chosen the indestructible path. The truth is, being a chosen one isn't about standing out for applause, proving yourself in the eyes of others, or collecting trophies that the world can measure. It's about embodying a force so aligned with truth that egos crumble in your wake, illusions collapse without effort, and the invisible currents of consciousness bend in response to your presence. You trigger identity collapses, reflect unfiltered truth, and dismantle false hierarchies, all without trying. You don't compete, you outgrow, you normalize what others call impossible. You expose pretenders, starve insecurities, and redefine power in ways no ego can touch. You've mastered detachment while radiating compassion, turned attacks into revelations, survived ego deaths that would have broken anyone else, and shattered the illusion of ownership. You've shown that wisdom flows from source, not performance, and that true legacy lives in the soul, not in accolades or monuments. Every encounter with you is a reckoning, a challenge, and a liberation all at once. Your life doesn't just unsettle, it awakens. Your presence doesn't merely change moments, it rewrites the map of possibility for everyone who crosses your path. And here's the final, undeniable truth. The world may try to measure you by its own shallow standards, but you exist beyond them. Your impact can't be copied, stolen, or diminished. Your essence ripples through generations, long after names are forgotten and facades crumble. That is the power of the chosen one, a force that doesn't need to fight, doesn't need to perform, and cannot be contained. If you recognize this truth in yourself, hold it close. Stand firm. Move with clarity. Know that every challenge, every confrontation, every shadow you face is simply another layer being stripped away so your light can shine unfiltered. You are unstoppable, untouchable, and unforgettable in ways that no ego, no system, and no illusion can ever contain. If this resonated with you, don't just watch, share it, like, comment, and spread this message, because the awakening doesn't stop with one person. It spreads through those who are ready to see the truth and rise beyond it. You are a chosen one, and the world is only beginning to understand the magnitude of what that means. God bless you.